Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first Peak Prosperity podcast of 2017. It is January 18th, and I am your host, Chris Martinson. My goodness, but we're recording this just a couple of days before the inauguration of Donald Trump. Now, while many in the U.S. and perhaps elsewhere are focusing on that as some sort of watershed event, those of us with a wider view simply see that as another symptom of a much larger set of dysfunctions. So what's in store for 2017? It's certainly off to a very promising start if you're a fan of groaning cornices and swelling predicaments, as I know I am. Now listen, today I'm really happy to welcome back to the program my good friend James Howard Kunstler. Jim is a well-known author and social critic whose ideas have been extremely influential to myself and both the peak oil and sustainable living movements. His best-known works include The Long Emergency, which if you haven't read it, you really should, in which he argues that declining oil production will someday result in the reversal of modern industrialized society and compel Americans, among many others, to return to smaller-scale, localized, semi-agrarian communities. Now, building on that theme, he wrote World Made by Hand and its sequels, The Witch of Hebron and The Harrows of Spring, which use fiction to entertainingly transport us into what that future narrative might look and feel like. And that is a world with a lot less of everything, including less net energy. So he also wrote Too Much Magic, Wishful Thinking, Technology, and the Fate of the Nation. And of course, he continues to write regularly at his excellent weekly blog found every Monday morning over at Kunstler.com. Jim, I'm really happy to have you back on today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with among the members of the Northeastern Head Cold Society.
Well, I certainly, we will both have that wonderful tone, so we'll see what we can do about this today. So, hey, listen, perhaps swelling predicaments raise some unfortunate imagery in my listeners' minds here, but many may resist the actual foundation of that assertion because the Dow Jones, it's hovering around the magic 20,000 number. Certainly, all's well with the world if stocks are doing well, right, Jim? So what are your views here about the Dow Jones and other stock indexes and your predictions for 2017?
Well, my view about the stock situation is that I actually put some skin in the game in the week between Christmas and New Year's and shorted the S&P. Because I think what we're going to see is, at first, sometime in the first quarter of the new year, about a 20% dump in the markets. And then I imagine we're going to see a bit of a retracement upward. And I think we'll see a larger dump in the fall of 2017. So I'm sitting there waiting. The S&P is a much larger index of stocks, and I'm hoping that it goes down. I'm betting that it goes down. I got skin in the game.
Now, certainly the central banks have been fighting any retracements tooth and nail. They come out with words, and I'm pretty sure deeds. Well, we know the deeds that they've done. Case of Bank of Japan, Swiss National Bank, just taking printed money and dumping it into stock markets to keep them elevated. They seem to be pretty committed to that course of action. So you think they fail in some way?
I think that the central banks are losing control of what they're able to do. I think that there are too many moving parts out there in this hyper overly complex financial world that are starting to shake loose, and that there's not a whole lot that the central banks are able to do about it anymore. They're kind of really just reduced to lying about the statistics.
Well, they've been doing that a long time, and for myself, the Fed lost all legitimacy years ago. Is this the year that more people join me in holding that view?
Well, I think that there are certainly a lot more people out there who are rightfully nervous about their wealth preservation, let alone being able to make a buck in financial speculation. But of course, I think you and I would try to promote the idea that making a living by speculating in finance is exactly where our society does not need to be. We need to go to the place where we start to think about making a living doing practical things to help our families and neighbors and our communities. And that's one of the interesting facets, I think, of the Trump revolution, if it is a revolution. And by the way, I didn't vote for the guy, and I didn't vote for his main opponent, Hillary Clinton. And people want to know who I voted for. Well, I wrote in David Stockman for what it's worth. Just so you know. But a lot of the hope, in quotes, that have been pinned on Trump are based on the idea that, first of all, he's assembling this team of mega competent capitalist movers and shakers who know how to make deals. The Wilbur Rosses and Rex Tillersons of the world, and that they're going to conjure up a tremendous surge of economic activity that will be, majorly fruitful going forward in the future and produce a tremendous amount of new wealth. And of course, that's, the stock market has been pricing that in, right? But if you really kind of drill down and look what's going on there, especially the infrastructure ideas, the idea that we're going to revive American manufacturing, and especially the idea that we're going to rebuild the happy motoring infrastructure so that we can have 50 more years of that. That seems to me would amount to once again repeating the greatest misallocation of resources in the history of the world. The last thing that America needs to do is to desperately try to maintain its suburban matrix. There are many other things we can do and ought to do, including reviving Main Street communities. One of the things we have to think about is reviving the small towns and small cities of America, because those are the places of the greatest disinvestment over the last 30 years. And we're going to need them very badly as the global economy withers. And it's not going to disappear. There's still going to be trade between nations, I believe, outside some kind of major set of kinetic war conflicts. But we're going to see the economy of North America turn inward and become more focused on what we can do here. And one of the things that suggests is that we're going to have to do more with some of the assets and virtues that we have, namely our inland waterway system, because that's going to also have to take the place of the trucking industry, which is going to be failing over the next 20 years.
And failing because?
Pardon me?
Failing because?
Well, I think because of the problems we're going to have with petroleum largely, and there really isn't a substitute for that for moving trucks. We're not going to electrify the trucking system. It would have been a good idea, and it probably still is a good idea for us to invest in the rail system. The freight system is sort of running, although the system is much less rich than it used to be at its height. It doesn't reach as many places. There aren't as many, small lines and capillary systems out there. But we really need to revive the American railroad system. And the trouble is that nobody has been interested in it. The voting public hasn't been interested in it, and the representatives haven't been interested in it. And somebody's got to be interested in it for that to happen. If it doesn't happen, of course, we're going to have trouble both moving people and goods around this very large continental nation. But the inland waterway system is important because it has an effect on the settlements and cities and towns along it. And many of them are the great cities of the American Midwest, which are in the greatest disrepair. Places like St. Louis and Kansas City and Louisville and the list is very long. These places need to be revived, and they will be revived organically, but it would help if there was some sort of official recognition that they needed all the help that they could get from the authorities. And right now, they're really not getting it. Some of these places do have, very robust suburban asteroid belts, but those are exactly the places that are going to be failing in the years ahead. So, we got to get the cities themselves back together. They're not going to be the cities they were in 1950, but they're going to be important again.
Now, this requires a level of vision that has multiple components on it, namely understanding where we really are in this resource story and really where we are in terms of infrastructure, all this and that. Have you gotten any sense yet from Trump's all-star capitalist cabinet that they actually really understand the nature of this predicament, or is this just let's build a few bridges and make some more happy motoring ways, and we're going to get back to the 50s again? Is that the vision, or do you think there's a sense a new vision actually could emerge here?
I think it can emerge, but I definitely go with column B. I don't think there is any sense that they really know where we're headed, what our destination is, and what the imperatives are, and what the future is actually telling us that we need to do. Don't forget the so-called psychology of previous investment is a very powerful force in American life, and is prompting us to do everything we can to maintain the investments we've already made. And, those investments are the ones I've already mentioned. And, the freeways, the suburban housing developments, the strip malls. For example, one of the most important economic things that could or should happen in the United States is the revival of small business in our towns, on our main streets. And of course, that whole project is hampered by the tremendous inertia of the presence of big box shopping and everything that it entails, including the siphoning out of all local wealth, outside of the towns where these places are located. And Donald Trump or the Secretary of Commerce is not going to send a directive down saying all Walmarts must close within 60 days. That's not going to happen. But we can see how it will happen organically. For one thing, the customers for the big box stores are going so broke that, they literally can't afford to buy stuff anymore. But also there's the whole question of the complex matrix of trade arrangements and relations that allow us to move huge amounts of goods 12,000 miles from Guangzhou, China to the Walmart in Philadelphia. And we can see how those systems might be imperiled very easily. All it takes is a little bit of ill feeling between the major trading partners, and all of a sudden, you've got a serious economic problem. So between the customers going broke and also there's a third thing, of course, which is the financial model for doing big box shopping, which requires things like a kind of corporate cannibalism for the different stores to start eating each other up. For example, in my little town, which is a kind of decrepit factory village, New England factory village of 2,500 people with 5 factories that no longer exist, where the ruins are still there. We have 3 major chain auto parts stores. They're now building a 4th, completely unnecessary. All it's going to do is kill the business in the other ones. And, this is the kind of behavior that has been embedded in that model of doing business. And at the same time, what we're going to see this year is a tremendous number of, hard copy stores, brick and mortar stores going down and being closed. So, the picture there is interesting. Things are happening, things are moving. But I don't think that we have really, taken this thinking out to see where it's leading. The best outcome would be that we could revive small businesses in our downtowns and rebuild our towns and the people who live there. Because, remember, when you have a small business owner in your town, for one thing, they own 2 properties in town. They own the building that their business is in, and they own their home. And they maintain them and they make them look okay so that, for one thing, your town doesn't look like it's falling apart. They have to generally hire people, employ people who they know, or at least people who live in the community. And, that has certain constraints on the relations between them. They can't mistreat them as badly as the chain stores treat their people. And they also support the institutions in town. They support the cultural institutions. They support the Little League. That was how the model used to work. And And in our rush to get what we called bargain shopping, we kicked all that stuff into the dumpster, and it's not there anymore. And what's also not there is the community support. So a tremendous amount of stuff was lost that we don't even reckon into the equation.
So I want to talk about some of these headwinds to small businesses then, Jim, because these are the enterprises that really give us the resilience we need. And as you mentioned, all of those fine features that come from having small locally owned businesses. There's this old joke about how if you have a committee of people, say at a university, and they're trying to make a couple of decisions. One is for a $10 million capital expansion to the observatory, and the other is what kind of coffee they're going to serve at the next meetings. You're going to get about 5 minutes of discussion on the $10 million thing and probably 3 hours on which coffee, because humans are not scaled for the complexity of really big decisions. And what you're talking about are highly complex things to deal with. So let me tell you about my experience as a small business owner, proprietor here in the state of Massachusetts. To have an LLC in the state, I have to pay $500 in a yearly filing fee to the state for some reason, just to have it. Two, the minimum tax they're going to charge me for having that business is an excise tax of $457. That's the smallest. You must either pay the larger of these two numbers, right? What you actually owe in taxes, or this excise tax. So, and then of course you have to file returns that go with that. So, assuming you can't handle the complexity of 57,000 pages of tax code and don't want to make a mistake, you got another $400 for a CPA to come in. You start adding these things up and you discover you're about $2,000 in the hole just to have a business. But now we have to also entertain the idea of going to local permitting. We've got zoning boards. We've got a lot of very interested people who are really concerned about, in my case, the idea that I might be typing things on a computer from home. So zoning variances are required because I dare to type shit at home, stuff at home, that will then, be somehow sent across the web. All of this is repeated everywhere, and you find that that the headwinds, just from a regulatory standpoint to do business in America, they constantly get a little stiffer each year. And secondarily, we discover that because Janet Yellen and Ben Bernanke decided to ram interest rates down to zero to help out their cartel-owned big bank buddies, what they've done is taken about $1 trillion in interest income that normally would have gone to parents and grandparents who, data shows, used to use that money to funnel it into the next generation coming behind them to start small and medium businesses, add it all up, and we see collapsing formation of small and medium-sized businesses. Business formation is way down in this country, and nobody seems to know what to do about it because all they know how to do is argue over which coffee we're going to have next. They can't quite figure out the larger issues going on here. And so the big stores win because they have the clout, the inertia to be able to sort of ride over all of these little roadblocks that have been put in place. And I don't see anything on the horizon that's going to really reverse that. We've had these are self-inflicted wounds, and nobody seems to know what to do about them. And everybody just sort of shrugs and says, well, what am I going to do? I'm just the person in town administering the rules. What can I do, right? Are you seeing that sort of same experience where you live?
Well, yes, although I think in the historical sense, I think we're a little bit further down the line. 15, 20 years ago, after I wrote my book about the fiasco of suburbia, which is called The Geography of Nowhere, I was invited to attend a lot of meetings in towns where the Walmarts were being permitted and approved. And, naturally, a lot of people were frightened about this because they thought that it would destroy local business, which, of course, it did. But, there was a great, there was a political, the Walmarts were able to organize the local discussions so that the local people got behind the Walmart. And, the battle cry was, "We want bargain shopping." And in fact, in one really amusing incident, the Walmart had an approval application in Lake Placid, and they sent out all this literature to the local people. And the return address, the name of the organization that they formed, is kind of a false front organization, was called Lake Placid Citizens for Walmart. And the return address on the literature they sent out was Lake Placid Citizens for Walmart, Bensonville, Arkansas. So, the people have already been played, and that's happened, 20 years ago. But um, they're certainly demoralized by the consequences of that. And that's one of the reasons that I think the inertia that you described, the inability to generate a meaningful public discussion that actually leads to some action, that's why that doesn't happen. But there's also, of course, the other problem with the fact that the central banks have shoveled all this money into the large primary dealer banks, and and then the primary dealer banks shovel all of that into treasury bonds or the equity markets or back into the Fed, just to park it there. And none of this money ends up being lent out to small business people who want a loan to, open a restaurant or a store that does, something special. And so people can't get the capital. So I think what we're going to find is that societies are emergent and self-organizing by nature. That is that, they will respond to the circumstances that are presented, and they will self-organize. But it may be very difficult, and one of the starting points will be that we just don't really have the capital. Also, because of the shenanigans going on in banking generally, things like the fobbing off of all mortgage loans to other entities, so that the local banks really, they're really not in the business of managing capital anymore. They're just middlemen for dispensing it elsewhere. So, they don't really have the ability to deploy saved capital to the local community. That might change if, for example, the Department of Justice under Trump decides to actually start enforcing the financial regulations and laws. That might make a big difference if a few bankers go to jail for the things that they're doing, and banking generally has to behave differently. I think we'll see this especially in the upcoming couple of years as to what happens with the securitized automobile loans that have kind of taken the place of the securitized mortgages that caused so much damage in 2008, because those securitized car loans are now sitting there like a time bomb waiting to blow up the banking industry. So anyway, there are a lot of components there to, for communities to get themselves back together. There's, restarting a discussion after a long period of being demoralized, and responding organically to circumstances that are happening, like the withering of global trade relations that enable Walmart, and the ability to get capital. So we'll see what happens. And by the way, that I did not address the problems with overregulation and taxing and fees and licenses and things that you raised, which would have to be part of an intelligent local discussion about what we're doing to hurt ourselves.
All right, so Jim, I belong to a dwindling tribe of people known as people who think energy matters still. And in your recent excellent 2017 forecast, which we're linking to below at the website here, you said that the USA ran out of growth capacity around the turn of the millennium because we ran out of affordable energy to run our our techno-industrial economy. Now, I concur. I want to take a moment here to see if we can get everybody on the same page, because I think quite a few people have been lulled by endless stories of surplus oil, and now think that oil has somehow slipped back to a substance which we can safely ignore for all our planning purposes. If we ever need more, American ingenuity will deliver it cheaply and on time. Let's talk about oil in particular here. Am I right to still have this front and center on my particular burner collection?
Oh, it's terribly important. The peak oil story never actually went away. It just became deceptively complex, and unfortunately, the American public has been misled, and they just misunderstand the problem. They see the price of gasoline at the pumps at $2.50 a gallon, and they think, oh, that's swell. and they read the propaganda in the news about shale oil, and they think, oh, that's great, we're going to be energy independent. And
Hmm.
it's very deceptive. So naturally they believe we don't have a problem with oil. The problem with oil can be stated very simply, that there may be quite a bit of oil out there in the earth, but we don't have the financial mojo to get it out of the ground anymore. It's too expensive. It costs too much. The reason that the industrial economy in the United States was so successful in the 20th century was that the ratio of the energy return on investment was so high. It was, in the 1930s, it was something like 100 barrels of oil in return for every barrel of oil energy that you put into the enterprise. So you got 100 barrels of oil back for every barrel equivalent of energy you put in. That's a huge benefit. It represents a tremendous amount of work that you can do and things that you can get done. But now that's changed, and the energy return on investment for things like shale oil are more like 5 to 1. For every 5 barrels of oil you get out of the ground, you have to put the equivalent of a barrel of energy into it. I think for tar sands, it's even lower. And I think that there's a general equation that or set of equations that you can use to maybe more easily understand this. One is that you need a ratio of at least 30 to 1 to have all of the things that we currently enjoy, including reliable electric grid, a trucking system that delivers food to the supermarkets every 3 days, tourism, theme parks, commuting by car, big box stores, all of those things we take for granted as being necessary components of our standard of living. You can't have them all at a less than 30 to 1 ratio. So you start going below that, and you start having to get rid of things. As it's played out, the most interesting thing is the one thing that we really got rid of was what? The middle class. And we didn't do it on purpose, but that's how things played out organically by a self-organizing economy. This economy said to itself, well, we can't really have all these people enjoying all these things at less than 30 to 1 ratio of energy return on investment, so we'll just get rid of something. So what we got rid of was the middle class.
So
And
you'll enjoy this then. So from Zero Hedge this morning, here's the headline: Live from Davos, Ray Dalio, Christine Lagarde, and Larry Summers discuss how to fix the middle class crisis. And my snarky comment on my website was that I thought that was kind of the equivalent of a panel of teenage boys from a prep academy giving advice on managing the pains of childbirth. I just,
yeah,
it's just really, you're going to fix the middle class by talking to three of the most disconnected people you could possibly imagine. The middle class is getting hollowed out for reasons, complex reasons that can't possibly be understood by those who are so insulated from everything that's truly transpiring in this world, I think.
well, maybe if we give everybody in Michigan a Tesla and a Platinum American Express card, that'll fix the middle class. And
Okay.
then they can be like the people at Davos.
All right, so now we're getting to the heart of it. Listen, I totally agree on the oil thing. This is something I'm going to be writing a lot about this year. In particular, was the massive destruction in investment that happened in the oil industry in 2015 and 16.
Yeah.
That has a 2 or 3 year lag on it. Eventually, we run into supply problems, and in the future, people are going, "Wow, now we have a supply thing we have to talk about," and not in a good way. And of course, there'll be price spikes that will accompany that, which will slam into the biggest wall of debt the world has ever accumulated, not including unfunded liabilities, which is a whole other topic we haven't broached yet. But put it all together, clearly a predicament. People aren't looking at it. And yet, at the end of 2016, I was treated to my least favorite parade of articles ever, which I have to deal with at the end of every year. And it's this glut of articles noting that Portugal and Costa Rica each supplied 100% of their electricity, although they incorrectly always say power, electricity for these brief periods of time from renewables. So ergo, goes the thinking, our alt energy future, it's just a matter of choice at this point, right? And as soon as I began to introduce numbers and reality into the comment threads of these articles, I was promptly downvoted, accused of simply not understanding the importance of being positive. Look, if Costa
Right.
Rica has done, look, they're getting energy from the water pipes in Portland. Somebody actually posted on my Facebook wall. They said maybe Flint, Michigan should look into this. I was like, maybe you should understand what geocline maps look like, right? It's flat in Flint, Michigan. Just the level of disconnect in this techno fantasy idea is that because something got solved somewhere, it's just a matter of willpower for that to be everywhere, and the level of thinking or lack of thinking, lack of reality that's invested in this thinking. Well, you wrote too much magic. So what are your thoughts here on these articles that are telling us our alt energy future is nigh? It's upon us.
Well, Arthur Clarke made the interesting observation that, in our time, a lot of the features of technology are indistinguishable from magic. And that, along with what we might call the religion of progress, the idea that's developed during and because of the 200 years of techno-industrial development, the idea that progress follows an inevitable upward arc, have produced a society of people who are just immersed in technological wishful thinking. And, they see all this magic out there. They see the solar cells and the Tesla cars and the giant wind rotors. And these things just they're awesome. And they think, well, if we just put some more of them out there, we'll be okay. And, they don't take any of the details into account, like the amount of rare earths it takes to construct a wind turbine the size of Godzilla, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or the fact that the sun doesn't shine all the time, or the fact that electric cars actually do need a power source other than the battery, to charge the battery, and that actually comes from dirty fossil fuels. So, the wishful thinking out there is enormous, and my guess is it will take a series of whacks upside the head with a metaphorical 2x4, for the public to start becoming more realistic about this. I've been convinced since I started writing books about this whole bag of problems that it really will take a series of shocks for Americans to change their focus and kind of wake up and look around them and see what they can do locally and see what's really real. And it doesn't help that it really doesn't help. I mean, it's been a kind of a tragic development that we've developed so many media interventions and mediations that the collective mind is now so confused between what they see on their little screens and what's actually going on out there in reality. So that's only kind of hyped up the wishful thinking and made it more difficult for us to have a coherent conversation about what's happening and what we're going to do about it.
And I'm very sympathetic. I understand these predicaments that you and I are describing are hard to think about. And for people who don't have a realistic response to that or haven't yet really internalized the emotional impact of really thinking through what we've done as a species here, is extraordinary. I mean, here's my disconnect of the week last week was the EPA took another whiff on neonicotinoids, this pesticide that exactly coincides with the complete decline and collapse of insect populations. I mean, just massive, right? And they said, well, we couldn't really find any, connection here. Europe found a connection right away. Everybody that's looked at it found it. EPA was like, we can't really see anything, right? That was the same week that a bumblebee was placed on the endangered species list, right? You lose your bumblebees, you're pretty well screwed in this story, right? They perform so many services for us, and I don't even want to try and calculate this in numerical terms or dollar terms because that's just a continuing the tragedy of thinking. But that's the sort of world we're living in where we can't even connect basic dots. But I got to tell you, Jim, from my perspective, having the web of life shred noticeably around us in my own brief lifetime from a geologic perspective, absolute shredding. causes deep discomfort. And so people don't know what to do with that. They don't look at it. And so I think this is where we get to sort of political trends, because I think that just sort of turns into angst in people who don't really know where the burr under the saddle is coming from, haven't really processed it, but they get scared. And so I think a trend that comes up from that is the populist uprisings that we're seeing across the world. So what are your predictions here for 2017? Do we see these populist uprisings continue to gather steam, or do they lose momentum here?
Well, first of all, I think you did mention a very interesting, you inserted a very interesting word, which is emotional. And there is a tremendous emotional component to this whole set of problems. And they actually go two ways. One way is that, you see the wreckage around you in the ecosystem of the planet, and it makes you despair. And then there's the other reaction, which is that it drives you into a kind of wishful thinking mania. It's a kind of a bipolar emotional effect. And that ends up producing all kinds of cognitive dissonance, cognitive a cloud of bad thinking that expresses itself in, for example, the kind of mania and hysteria that we've been seeing on campus for the last 2 years. That's actually just wrecking the intellectual life of our country. But what do I see happening? Well, for one thing, it's perfectly obvious to a lot of people. This is not an original thought, but the distress is spreading all over the civilized parts of the world, and we're seeing it being expressed especially in Europe. So we've had the Brexit, we've had the Brexit vote anyway. We've had the Trump electoral shock. We're probably going to have several shocks in Europe. This spring, we have the election in France, and who knows what's going to happen there. Ms. Le Pen might win the election, in which case the European project's going to be in jeopardy. We have the election in the Netherlands, where Mr. Geert Wilders is also, a nationalist and a rightist and an anti-immigrationist, and he's liable to win that election. Theresa May is now talking about accelerating the Brexit itself to just get it over with. What I find most interesting, though, Chris, is something we've been both talking about on our various blogs and podcasts, is the hysteria around Russia.
Oh, absolutely.
And the idea that the amazing transformation in the progressive Democrat wing of spectrum of our politics. And by the way, I still remain a registered Democrat. I have been since the McGovern election of '72, but I'm pretty disaffected from my own party and alienated. But we see this amazing transition of the Democrats into virtual McCarthyites. Seeing a Russian under every bed. One of the features of the hysteria that I don't get it at all, and I don't understand how they put this over, is the idea that Russia covets the Baltic states and its former Soviet possessions, as though the Russians need a whole new bunch of economic dependents to pay for.
Yeah.
I mean, it's insane. There's no evidence that the Russians want to take over Estonia and Lithuania and Latvia. I doubt that they want to take responsibility for the Ukraine, because Ukraine's a failed state. It's a basket case. It would be a black hole for Russia to have to pound all their capital into.
Well, even more to the point on that one, on Ukraine, Putin made a ton of sense to me way back when this was all happening in 2014 and 15. And he said, look, we've lived this story before. When the ultra-nationalists rise in Ukraine, this is a very bad thing, and this is on our doorstep, and we have a real interest in making sure that these Nazi thugs do not rise again. And this is where I know my media cannot be trusted. They now see a Nazi under every bed in this country through small imagined things, and there are entire platoons operating under warlords in Ukraine with Waffen SS insignia proudly displayed on their badges. When did the New York Times ever pass over a story talking about the rise of militarized soldiers with Nazi insignias on them. When have they ever taken a pass on that story? Well, when John McCain and Victoria Nuland and the deep state of the United States says these are the people we're supporting right now, that's when they give a pass to that story. So it's just astonishing to me that Putin's making a lot of sense. He's like, no, we don't like this brand of nationalism on our doorstep. We have an interest here, and we're making it sound like he committed some huge foul by the people of Crimea freely voting to rejoin Russia rather than be associated with the people who've said they want to kill them. So it's just that we can't even process that level of simple information is an astonishing turn of events to me here. It feels we've slipped somewhere.
I'm always proud of saying that I'm allergic to conspiracy ideas, but it's very hard to escape the thought that the military and intelligence component of the deep state really wants to keep bad relations between the U.S. and Russia. They just don't want us to, they want a conflict. It's hard to imagine that they want it simply to support, the companies that make bombs and planes and other stuff. But, I just don't see what they see. I look at Crimea. I see a peninsula in the Black Sea that has belonged to Russia for as long as America has been a nation, except for a short span of time when Nikita Khrushchev gave it away to the Soviet Socialist Republic of Ukraine, which was part of the Soviet Union, by the way, which at the time was Russia. So the Crimea has only been a part of some other entity, Ukraine, for a very short period of time. It's Russia's only warm water port, and historically has been, and it's full of Russian-speaking people who identify themselves as Russians. So, the idea that Russia has criminally annexed Ukraine, along with the fact that they voted to do it, the public voted. So, how the media puts that story over, I don't know, except maybe large numbers of the supposedly thinking classes have absolutely lost their ability to process reality.
Well, you have people shaking their left fist saying Hillary won the popular vote, and that means something. So they think when people vote, they're offended. The popular vote should count for something more than it did in this case, and then they shake their right hand and say, well, and Russia annexed Crimea. And, that it has to be the very definition of holding two competing thoughts in your head and holding them both to be true.
That's very interesting. And nobody, it's funny because nobody has actually made that point beside you.
Well, it just popped into my head.
Yeah, it's an interesting contradiction. So we have all these contradictions going on among the thinking classes, as far as, how our relations with the other countries in the world are going to be. And I'm very troubled about, one of the reasons I, still persist in thinking of myself as a Democrat is because, when I was a young person and the Vietnam War was going on, it was hard not to think that the Democratic Party was the party of the intelligent people and the Republican Party was the party of the dumb people. At least that was kind of the meme back, 40 years ago. So, but it's very troubling to see, people in academia, people in high positions in Washington, people in the media and show business being just unable to use their minds. And it probably says something very troubling about our culture itself, that, this is a culture that has really lost its ability to understand where it is at this moment in history. And that happens sometimes. I think that you can imagine a sine cosine waveform that has peaks and troughs, and that there are some times on this waveform when the self-awareness of a society is very low, and sometimes when it's higher. And we're at one of those points where our self-awareness collectively is tragically low. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how we get out of this. Probably, as I said, a series of shocks, and my guess is that they will be economic shocks. And the reason I titled my 2017 forecast "The Wheels Come Off" is because I think that this is going to be a year when we are going to see a lot of economic and financial shocks. And that may start unclogging and unkludging the forebrains of America.
Well, let's hope so. Now, final question here. Trump is running on this whole "Make America Great Again." There's a sense that there's the possibility here for a resurgent, big burst of American economic growth and all of that. In your 2017 forecast, you said that Trump can't pull a Reagan, so maybe it's not morning in America. What did you mean by that?
Well, that was really kind of a reaction to just the statistical situation we're in. When
Hmm.
Reagan was elected, the stock market was actually rather low, and it had nowhere to go but up, really. When Reagan was elected, the national debt was pretty modest, and he was able to just borrow and spend a lot of money. Considering the fact that he used the term borrow and spend pejoratively against the Democrats back then. That's exactly what he did, and he had a lot of room to do it. And he ran up the national debt by $2.5 trillion, which is a lot. I think he did he double it or more than double it. I think it was less than $1 trillion when he came in, and interest rates were extraordinarily high when Reagan took office. They were up in the 15 to 20% range. Because of Paul Volcker, the then Federal Reserve Chairman's campaign to fight this stagflation that was going on. Where we had mortgage rates up at 18% and car loans at 18%. People couldn't buy stuff. So Reagan had a lot of room to maneuver. It's exactly the opposite for Trump. Trump has now inherited a national debt that Barack Obama doubled from 10 trillion to now going to be 20 trillion when Trump is in the first quarter. The stock market is at never before seen extraordinary highs, and interest rates are about as low as they've ever been historically. So, he really doesn't have that kind of room to maneuver, and I think it's going to be a tough slog for him to do any of the things he wants to do. I also have some doubt in my mind that he's going to even be there that long. I know that this is a little off the reservation, but I'm wondering a little bit whether there will be an attempt to just remove him from office within the first 60 days. And I know that that's an awful and sad thought. Not because Trump is such a wonderful person, but because we really don't want to see our political system that badly disrupted. And the way certain parties are acting in America, especially the intelligence matrix out there, kind of makes you wonder about what the internal tensions are in our society right now, and how terrible and close to breaking they may be.
Well, certainly this is as divisive as I can remember it, although I would like to, most people may be unaware of this, but when G.W. Bush was elected, there's an inauguration day, there's and he was selected by the Supreme Court with that bizarre decision. Ever since, I've referred to them as the subprime court. They have no standing in my life anymore as a useful body. But at any rate, the part of the tradition is to get out of the motorcade and walk the final, I don't know what it is, quarter mile or a mile or something. Anyway, so the president-elect is supposed to get out and walk and do this big, walk of I guess, to the coronation, as it were, on Inauguration Day. So Bush couldn't do that. Got out of his vehicle, eggs were thrown, snowballs were thrown. They whisked him back in. First president in that I could find in memory who did not take that walk. So people were pretty divided then. Obviously, things didn't go so great for the country in the years after that. So there is that level of divisiveness here at this point. We know that people are planning to disrupt the inauguration, and there are people planning for how they can get this guy out of office, whether they have any traction or not, whether they can pull that off or not. But that energy is there. And to me, again, the deeper tragedy in this is that we're spending our time focusing our rage and anger and energy and activism at the symptoms rather than really beginning to address the underlying causes. And as a quick example, you and I have been talking about it. My personal view is that The Democratic National Committee needs to spend time examining how it failed itself, not understanding whether they can pin the blame for the Podesta hacks on Russia, right? It's just a classic diversionary. I refuse to look at my own stuff, and so I'm going to blame somebody. That outward projection is not helpful, not needed, divisive, diversionary, and ultimately, I think, self-destructive. Every so often the drunk has to square up with his, with his habits. So,
well, they probably haven't hit bottom yet.
That's the unfortunate conclusion I come to. Thanks for putting it that way. So with that, hey, we're out of time. I could talk to you forever on all of these subjects. Jim, thank you so much for your time today. Always one of my favorite guests, as well as that of our listeners. And so please tell those listeners about your website, books, any upcoming events where they can follow you more closely.
Well, thanks very much for having me on the podcast. And my website is www.kunstler.com. I write a weekly blog. I may be going twice weekly as the Trumtopian revolution unwinds. I may be doing it Mondays and Thursdays now instead of just Mondays. So look for that maybe in the month ahead. My most recent book was The Harrows of Spring, which was the fourth and final installment of the quartet of World Made by Hand novels, which are about life in the post-economic collapse American future. And I'm getting ready to publish another novel. More about that on my website in the months to come. So thanks for having me on, Chris. Always a pleasure to have a meeting of the Northeastern U.S. Head Cold Club.
Well, absolutely, and may our numbers grow. So, just joking. All right, Jim, thank you so much, and we'll do this again soon, I hope.
Okay, bye, Chris.